Do the introductions in English and in Greek as a courtesy to the guests who come to participate in our Intercollegiate Democratic Convention. So I'll introduce myself. I'm David Wisner. I'm the director of the Dukakis Center at ACT.
And I'm Maria Kyriakidou. I'm the chair of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Division of Humanities and Social Sciences at ACT.
So we'd like to welcome you. Καλώς ορίσατε.
Ναι, χαιρόμαστε πολύ που είστε μαζί μας σήμερα. Μ' αρέσει πάρα πολύ αυτό που βλέπω, τα τραπέζια με ανθρώπους από διαφορετικά υπόβαθρα, backgrounds και νομίζω ότι θα είναι ένα πολύ ωραίο διήμερο μπροστά μας.
Okay, so we're going to try to accomplish essentially by the end of the second day of deliberations tomorrow to draft a democratic charter for Europe. The purpose of your debates the next 2 days is to try to decide what kind of democracy you want for Europe. What democracy will look like in the next 10, 20, 30 years in your Europe, considering that in that space of time it will be your Europe.
Right. Εδώ λοιπόν περιμένουμε καταρχάς να κάνετε το δικό σας brainstorming, να κάνετε debates, να συζητήσετε τις ιδέες σας για να καταλήξουμε αύριο μετά το μεσημεριανό διάλειμμα στο να προτείνετε όλοι σε μια ολομέλεια μια πρόταση, μια δημοκρατική πρόταση για την Ευρώπη, για την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Θέλουμε να δούμε λίγο, επειδή είστε το μέλλον της Ευρώπης, να δούμε τις δικές σας προτάσεις για την δημοκρατία στην Ευρώπη για τα επόμενα 10, 20, 30 χρόνια.
Okay, so this evening we'll start our deliberations. We've also been joined by our keynote speaker, William Valasidis of the European Court of Justice. He'll speak with the high school students in the next period of time, and then he'll deliver a lecture for everybody who's attending our event and who comes from the outside as well. Those are the two things that we'll do this evening.
Mm-hmm. Απόψε λοιπόν αυτό που θα κάνουμε είναι ότι τα παιδιά που είναι από γυμνάσια, από και λύκεια, θα μιλήσουν τώρα με τον κύριο Valasidis πριν την μεγάλη ομιλία του κύριου Valasidis στις 7.30, ενώ τα παιδιά τα οποία δουλεύουν, είναι από πανεπιστήμια, κολέγια κτλ. Θα δουλέψουν με τους μέντορες τους στη διαδικασία, στο τι δηλαδή θα γίνει, κυρίως κατά κύριο λόγο αύριο. Οπότε θα δείτε λίγο τη διαδικασία. Οι μέντορες σας θα έρθουν στα τραπέζια σας σε λίγο, είναι εδώ και θα συζητήσετε μαζί τους την επόμενη ώρα. 7 με 7.30 θα κάνουμε ένα διάλειμμα για να προετοιμάσουμε λίγο το χώρο για την μεγάλη διάλεξη και 7.30 ώρα θα έχουμε τη διάλεξη.
Okay, so each working group will have a mentor or a moderator or someone to help conduct the debate. We're not going to concern ourselves with the rules of procedure as you might if this were a simulation of the United Nations, a model United Nations. There will be a very simple procedure that we'll follow, And the moderators will help you debate, help you put your ideas on the table, help you begin to draft your ideas, and then get us as a group to the position we're able finally as a plenary, as the whole group, to vote on the charter that you've produced. That's essentially what we're going to try to do. We'll start doing that this evening before the lecture.
Ναι, ξέρετε λίγος πολύ τα θέματά σας και έχετε πάρει όλοι κάποια links τα οποία διαβάσετε με άρθρα για να προετοιμαστείτε για αυτό το διήμερο. Από εκεί και πέρα θα συζητήσετε με τους μέντορες και μεταξύ σας, ώστε ο στόχος είναι ότι κάθε ομάδα με τη βοήθεια των μεντόρων θα μπορέσει αύριο να συμβάλλει σε αυτή την ολομέλεια, στη δημοκρατική συζήτηση για αυτή τη δημοκρατική πρόταση. Επίσης, να σας πούμε ότι αυτό δεν είναι μια προσομοίωση των Ηνωμένων Εθνών με τους κανόνες που ήδη γνωρίζετε όσες έχετε ήδη πάρει μέρος. Είναι λίγο πιο από τη βάση δημοκρατική διαδικασία. Γι' αυτό το λέμε και δημοκρατική συνέλευση.
Very good. Now, this is an idea that's actually been floated by the French president, Emmanuel Macron. If we want Europe to be more democratic, who is best situated to tell us what that means? It's the ordinary citizen, people like you and me. And here's where our organization comes to play. I represent the Dukakis Center. Dukakis was the 1988 Democratic nominee for President of the United States, a Greek American, the first Greek American to run for President of the United States. When he retired from an active role in public life, he went into teaching. He teaches now at two universities, Northeastern University in Boston, UCLA in Los Angeles. And he's dedicated himself to encouraging young people like yourselves to take an active interest and role in public life. So in this simulation, we're urging you to do just that. The day may come, and I hope it will be soon, that you're actually deliberating as representatives of your cities, of your communities, for our foreign students of your countries. And hopefully this will be one of the exercises that put it in your head that this is something that I would like to do too. So on that note, I welcome you. Dr. Kyriakidou will tell you briefly about the American College of Thessaloniki and what she does, and then we'll get underway.
Right, that's fine. Εμείς λοιπόν, αυτή η ιδέα που υλοποιούμε σήμερα είναι μια ιδέα που πρωτοξεκίνησε ο πρόεδρος της Γαλλίας, ο Εμμανουέλ Μακρόν. Πίστεψε λοιπόν ότι για να γίνει η Ευρώπη πιο δημοκρατική πρέπει οι πολίτες να προωθήσουν τη δημοκρατία μέσα από δημοκρατικές συνελεύσεις σαν και αυτές. Το κέντρο Dukakis, νομίζω ότι καταλάβετε τον κύριο Βίσνερ, ο Μάικλ Dukakis εκπροσωπεί το κέντρο Dukakis. Ο Μάικλ Dukakis ήταν ο πρώτος Ελληνοαμερικανός υποψήφιος πρόεδρος των ΗΠΑ το 1988 και έχει αφοσιώσει την ζωή και το έργο του στο να μπορέσει να ενθαρρύνει τους νέους να συμμετέχουν στις δημοκρατικές διαδικασίες. Εγώ, όπως σας είπα, είμαι πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Κοινωνικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών στο ACT, στο οποίο έχουμε ένα πτυχίο που δίνουμε στις διεθνείς σχέσεις και μέσα από αυτό έχουμε πολλά μαθήματα που αφορούν τις δημοκρατικές διαδικασίες, το διεθνές δίκαιο, την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα, τους διεθνείς οργανισμούς. Και μέσα σε αυτά τα πλαίσια είμαστε εδώ σήμερα.
Okay, now one word quickly. You'll see two gentlemen here with cameras. We're producing a documentary. This is our 20th year of public service initiatives at the Dukakis Center. So we want to thank you in advance for being part of our production. Thank you and good luck with your deliberations.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ και ίσως δείτε υπάρχουν δύο άνθρωποι με κάμερες εδώ γιατί είναι στη διαδικασία του να φτιάξουν ένα ντοκιμαντέρ για τα 20 χρόνια από την ίδρυση του κέντρου Dukakis. Ευχαριστούμε που θα είστε μέρος αυτού του ντοκιμαντέρ και αυτής της δουλειάς και ευχαριστούμε που είστε εδώ σήμερα. Είναι μια πολύ ωραία μέρα, αύριο επίσης μάλλον, αλλά διαλέγετε να είστε εδώ σήμερα και χαιρόμαστε πολύ γι' αυτό. Ευχαριστούμε.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Okay, it's nice and cozy. I like it. Okay, it's my great pleasure to welcome Mr. William Valasidis, who is the Director of Communications at the European Court of Justice. He has previously held the position of Director of Protocol and Information at the Court. He served in the chambers of the President of the Court, Professor Vasilios Kouris, who is a very famous legal scholar in Greece and in Europe, and in the chambers of the Judge Krateros Ioannou. He holds a degree in law summa cum laude from the Aristotelian University of Thessaloniki School of Law. Anybody from the Aristotle School of Law? Yay! And he has a master's of an LLM degree from the Harvard Law School. Mr. Valasidis, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I don't need to introduce myself after this very flattering introduction. I would like to thank the Dukakis Center and Dr. David Wisner in particular for giving me the opportunity to come back to my alma mater and be with you today. This brings back a lot of memories, especially since I spent this morning at Anatolia, and it reminded me that the last time that I ever had to give a speech to this school was 29 years ago, when I introduced our keynote speaker at our commencement back 1989. Anatolia for me is family, and for me there are two classes in particular that have been very important in my life. The first one is the class of 1953, which was the class of my father, and the second is the class of 1989, which is represented here by some of my best friends in life who came here to be with us this evening. There's also one representative from the class of 1953, which is Ambassador Leonidas Savvaidis, one of my father's closest friends. My father was a doctor. He wanted me to be a doctor, but I ended up following an international career in the European Union institutions. Mr. Vangelidis was a career ambassador and also was working in the European institutions for a while. So you can imagine who ended up being my role model, given the fact that I never liked physics, chemistry, or biology. The European Union has a program which is called Back to School. And the European Union encourages its employees to actually go back to their schools and talk about Europe, talk about what they do. So I'm here at the invitation, of course, of the Dukakis Center, but also with the help and the blessings of the Court of Justice of the European Union that supports such activities. Now, the topic, what I'm going to talk to you about, and I hope we can also engage in a discussion after that. Democracy and the rule of law in the European Union, between myth and reality. Why did I choose this topic? Well, first and foremost, because it's the topic of your convention. Secondly, because there are certain persistent misconceptions about the European Union, and especially a misconception that the European Union is an organization that is not democratic, that there is a very big democratic deficit in the European Union. Another reason is that there is a wave of Euroscepticism going on throughout Europe. The latest example of which was probably Brexit and the recent elections in Italy. I would therefore like to clarify and to set the record straight about certain recurrent inaccuracies about the EU that tend to gain ground and tend to become collective conscience. And one of the reasons why this is happening, and I'm speaking of course on my own account, and I'm not here representing the European Union or my institution, the Court of Justice in any way. I believe that the European Union is staying too neutral and too distant with the internal political wranglings in the member states. And I strongly believe that it is time to, let's say, fight back and set the record straight. The European Union has come closer to the citizens and explain directly what it really is and what it isn't. So I will start by going back to basics. What is Europe? What is the European Union? Europe started and remains a peace project. Europe started as a peace project after one of the most devastating wars that this world has ever known. This is why in 2012, I don't know if you remember it, the European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize. It is for that particular reason. The European Union was conceived by the founding fathers as a means to take old conflicts and old adversities and resolve them peacefully through a new platform of cooperation. Another thing which is really important to keep in mind is that Europe, the European Union, is not a goal in itself. The European Union is the means to achieve certain noble objectives, such as peace, democracy, respect for the rule of law, respect for human rights, including social rights, solidarity, mutual respect between peoples of different ethnicity, different culture, different language, different religion, respect of other people as equals, regardless of their race, origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, etc. People who respect each other as equal, as equivalent. And by the term equivalent, I'm going back to the etymology, equal value. People of equal value that respect each other, they do not go to war with each other. And this is the fundamental concept that is underlying the whole European project. This is where it all started. What is not Europe? Europe is not a superstate. A lot of people will try to convince you otherwise, but Europe is not a superstate. It is not a federal state, and it does not aspire to be one. The EU is a common level of governance aimed to tackle issues and problems that cannot be dealt with effectively at the mere national level. That's all the European Union is. We can make here a brief comparison with the United States of America. You can see a lot of similarities between the US federal system and the European Union. They are the same political and administrative, similar political and administrative structures in order to balance state prerogatives with federal powers. But there is an important difference between the United States of America and the European Union. And what is that? Well, what does the US Pledge of Allegiance say? Does anybody know?
Which part of it?
The one that says about one nation.
Under God.
Under God, indivisible.
With liberty and justice for all.
What is the motto of the European Union? Does anybody know? It was actually proposed by students such as yourself a few years ago.
All for one and one for all.
It is united in diversity. So there you can see the difference. Because the EU does not aim to eliminate the nation state. On the contrary, the EU finds force in the cultural diversity of its peoples. And there, I would like to go a little bit off script here and to describe to you my working day. I'm the Director of Communications of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and my department has 3 units. One is for press relations, one is for electronic media and publication, and one is for transparency and access to documents. The press department is headed by a Spaniard. So when I go to his office or he comes to my office, well, I speak a little bit of Spanish, so hola, ¿qué tal, compadre? Buenos días. The head of unit of my other unit, which is on electronic media and publications, well, she's Italian, but she's married to a Greek. So of course she wants to practice her Greek. So we speak in Greek whenever she comes to my office. And my third head of unit, who is responsible for transparency, she's German. And I like to say Guten Morgen to her, but that's as far as my German goes. With her we speak either French or English. the working environment of the European Union is kind of a little bit on a very smaller scale what the European Union is doing as a whole. It doesn't, my working environment doesn't oblige me to speak one language and the same. I can speak with whomever I want, whatever language I want. Only when it is absolutely necessary that the people around the table have to speak one language, this is when we're obliged to speak French, because that's the working language of the court for historical reasons. So this is just to give you an idea about how Europe fosters diversity, embraces diversity, and doesn't intervene to harmonize unless if it is absolutely necessary. Now, back to the script. Why is the European Union necessary, in my humble opinion? Take the Russian Federation. There is a part of the Russian Federation which is what we call the European part of Russia. From the north to from Murmansk all the way down to the Black Sea, and from the borders with the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, to the Urals. This is, let's say, roughly the European part of the Russian Federation. This territory is as large as the European Union. To give you some other examples, Brazil is double the size of the European Union. Canada is more than double the size of the European Union, and so is the United States. Texas is a favorite example of one. Texas is about 15% of the territory of the whole European Union. So what is the difference between the European Union on the one hand and those territories? Well, all those territories are one nation, one state. The European Union has 28 states. So it is a very fragmented piece of land and very densely populated as well. But there are certain problems and certain issues that know no borders. I'll give you some examples. Clean water. Is that an issue that can be resolved by one nation alone? Water flows. The water knows no borders. I'll give you an example. The Danube. The Danube crosses Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria. Those are just the countries of the European Union. You cannot Moldova and Ukraine. Clean air. The air knows no borders. It flows freely. A nuclear power plant. We have a nuclear power plant where I live in France, 30 kilometers from my house. What happens to that nuclear power plant concerns me, living in Luxembourg. It concerns also the German citizens living in Trier, and everybody. It concerns four or five countries. The fight against organized crime, the fight against terrorism. These are issues that cannot be dealt with by one nation state. They need international cooperation. Nowhere else in the world do you have to cross 8 frontiers to travel the 3,000 kilometers from Rovaniemi in Finland to Lecce, Italy. This is artificial, this fragmentation. It is artificial. Therefore, what I would like to submit to you is that the proximity and the number of states that exist within the European Union require the closest possible cooperation in order to survive in the complex modern world. Now I'm going to the main part of what I would like, of the ideas that I would like to share with you today. The first question I would like to ask myself and answer is, does the EU have to be democratic? Although it is not a superstate, it does not aspire to be a superstate, the EU was born through the transfer of a small portion of sovereignty from each member state. Member states willfully gave part of their sovereignty in order to ensure that they can cooperate at the European level, that there's some decision-making power at the European level. Therefore, the prerogatives of the European Union must be exercised, and its powers must be exercised with democratic legitimacy. That's why the European Union has to be democratic. Now let's remember, or maybe I don't know if somebody from the audience would like to remind us what are the basic characteristics of democracy. Yes.
Freedom of speech.
Yes, this is, yeah, freedom in general, yeah.
Karina?
Respect for different races, different religions.
Is that a characteristic of democracy?
Of course. Is an impact of democracy.
What is the basic principle of democracy?
Freedom.
Where does the power lie?
Representation of the people by the people.
The people. Power to the people. Universal voting rights. Yes?
The government is of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Exactly. Majority rule, but minority rights. The majority does not have the right to dominate the minority. The minority has certain minimum rights. Free and fair elections. It is very important principle of democracy. Respect for the rule of law. That's my favorite, since I work at the Court of Justice of the European Union. A constitution. A constitution that sets out all the rules about how the polity is supposed to be organized. And another favorite of mine, separation of powers. Because in a modern democracy, the executive, legislative, and judicial powers have to be separate and independent from one another. Now, on that basis, based on those characteristics, let's try to analyze the European Union and see if it is democratic or not. Does the EU have elections? Yes. Is it only the European elections that are pertinent in that respect? No. Because it is the European Union is an organization of 28 member states, all of these states are democratic. Therefore, the representatives of those member states that represent them at European Union fora, be that the Council of Ministers or other such institutions, they are all democratically elected, or at least democratically legitimized. Is there majority rule in the European Union?
Yes.
Yes. And it is on every level. At the level of the Parliament, at the level of the elections, first of all, the level of the procedure in the European Parliament, and at the level of the decision making at the Council and at the Commission, majority rule. How about minority rights? How are they guaranteed in the European Union? Does anybody know? The European Union has a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which was actually promulgated back in 2000, and it gained binding force with the Treaty of Lisbon. So there is a Bill of Rights for the European Union. Does the European Union have a constitution? That's a tricky one.
No.
Well, it doesn't have a document that is named constitution, but the treaty on the European Union and the treaty on the function of the European Union is the constitution of the European Union. And it is important to remember that the constitution of the EU, the treaties, have been democratically approved, either by national parliaments or by referenda, and sometimes by several referenda. Every single modification of the treaties in some countries goes through a referendum, in Ireland, for example. Or it is approved by national parliaments, and who is in the national parliaments? The representatives of the people. Is there separation of powers in the European Union?
Yes.
Yes. And it's actually much more pronounced, much clearer than it is in Greece. Because in Greece, the executive and the legislative, well, sometimes they are confounded. If the prime minister wants something, and if he says there is party discipline, you have to vote that, it gets voted. In the European Union, it's different. The legislative and executive powers are much more distinct, and one controls the other, checks and balances. Let's start with the legislative powers of the European Union. First and foremost, we have the Parliament. The Parliament is elected directly by European voters. Majority rule. The Parliament basically intervenes right now, especially after the Treaty of Lisbon, in almost every piece of legislation that comes out of the European Union. We have the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers is composed by whom? But the ministers, who are the elected officials of the people, again. It is interesting to compare these two institutions, the Parliament and the Council, with the House of Representatives and the Senate in the United States of America. The Parliament has more than 700 members, and each member state has a number of members of the European Parliament, pretty much reflecting how populous that state is. And this is the same thing that happens in the United States with the House of Representatives. California doesn't have the same number of congressmen as Delaware, because one is a very small state, the other one is like bigger than France. So this is pretty much what happens in the European Parliament. But at the Council, it is one representative per member state. In the US Senate, it is two. There are 2 senators per state. You see there the equivalent. How laws are made in the European Union? It's important to know. First of all, the legislative initiative comes from the Commission. That's the executive. I will speak about the Commission a little bit later. In order for the Commission to actually make a proposal, there are several levels of committees of experts that actually have to have the expertise to deal, because sometimes legislation is for really, really technical matters, like whether we or not we should use and at what level a specific pesticide in agriculture. There you need expertise. Who are the experts? The experts are not people that the Commission employs. They're designated by the member states. Therefore, we go back to the member states for the expertise. There are consultations with stakeholders. So you have the big chemicals companies that manufacture this specific pesticide that are going to make their voice heard. The agriculture associations that will make their voice heard, and every association or group of people that may have an interest in that particular piece of legislation. Then we come to the proposal of the Commission, which is submitted to the Council first. And then the Council starts to amend. I was discussing with Ambassador Valasidis before, and he said, well, usually the Council receives a piece of legislation that thick from the Commission, and then they cut and they cut and they cut, and by the end of the legislative process, it's only 4 pages long. This is pretty much how it happens. Let's move now to the executive and see whether the Commission, which is the government of the EU, right? It's like the equivalent of the government here in Greece, with the ministers, the prime minister, etc., whether they have democratic legitimacy. Well, the commissioners are appointed by the member states, but so are ministers, no? It's the prime minister that appoints ministers. The ministers don't have to be members of parliament. Here, I'm talking about in Greece. That goes for every other member state, normally. So it is the elected representatives of the member states that appoint the commissioners. So there is an indirect democratic legitimacy. But, and this is something that's extremely different from Greece and from many other member states. When a commissioner is appointed, that's not it. The commissioner has to go to a special committee of the European Parliament, present him or herself, go through days sometimes of gruesome questioning, with the risk of being rejected. And if the Parliament rejects the Commissioner, then that's it. The member state has to propose someone else. The Parliament gives democratic legitimacy, I believe. Also, another important thing to know about the executive of the European Union, the Commission, is that it only has the power of initiative. The Commission cannot decide legislation, cannot adopt legislation, can only propose. Therefore, and this is very provocative, and I usually say it and people are a bit shocked, Brussels doesn't exist. This idea that there's a group of Eurocrats in a smoke-filled room, in a back room, that decide on the future of Europe and adopt legislation and, you know, pretty much arrange everything without any democratic legitimacy and without accountability to the people, that concept doesn't exist. It is the member states and the elected representatives of the European Parliament, member states as represented in the Council of Ministers, and the representatives of the people at the Parliament that decide. This is how decisions are taken in the European Union. Then we have, of course, the judicial power, the judiciary. The appointment of the judges at the Court of Justice of the European Union is a procedure that is provided for in the Constitution of the European Union, the treaties. The procedure is rather simple. The member state chooses a candidate to propose as judge for the Court of Justice of the European Union, either the higher court, which is the Court of Justice, or the lower court, which is the General Court. But that's not it. There is a special committee of experts, of really prominent legal scholars that scrutinize the candidates, and they interview them. And from what I've heard, it is a really gruesome interview. And they issue an opinion about whether the candidate is adequate for the job or not. That opinion is secret, because there is personal data involved. It is distributed to the governments of the member states, and then it is the representatives of the governments of the member states that unanimously have to either reject or approve the candidate. This is how judges are appointed in Europe. This is, in my humble opinion, enough democratic legitimacy for judges. Judges are not elected. We were discussing with Dr. Wiesner before that yes, in the United States of America, and it's not everywhere, but in some states the judges are elected. In my humble opinion, the election of judges means fundraising, therefore dependency. It means that you have to explain to the people exactly how you're going to decide cases, which is really, really incompatible with judicial independence. Very important as well to know that the Court of Justice of the European Union, the higher court, is composed of one judge per member state. The lower court, the General Court, is two judges per member state. That means that all legal cultures are represented at the court. And when the judges from different legal cultures deliberate between themselves, there is an osmosis happening. And every single legal system has something to contribute in what we call the jurisprudence of the Court of Justice of the European Union. Very important also as well to know that because the terms, the judges are not appointed for life, they're appointed for 6-year terms, and these terms are renewable. In order to preserve the independence of the judges, the legislator, the constitutional legislator of the European Union provided for the secrecy of deliberations. Nobody has the right to know which judge voted for what. That gives the freedom to a judge sometimes to vote against his or her own member state without having to suffer consequences because a minister or the prime minister didn't really like that and therefore would lead to his non-reappointment, although he may be an excellent judge. Another very important characteristic of the administration of justice in the European Union is how it is carried out. It is not a high court, the European court, that tells everybody, interprets the law and tells everybody, well, this is the way you have to do it and that's it. It doesn't work like that. Most of the cases going to the higher court, to the European Court, to the Court of Justice of the European Union, they are what we call preliminary references. I will give you an example about how that works. And it's actually a real example. Here in Thessaloniki, there was a lady, a civil servant, who was blessed with having twins. And she asked for double the maternity leave because she had twins. The Greek state refused. saying that only since the children were born at the same time, there's only one time maternity leave that is going to be given because it has to be close to the birth, etc., etc. This, of course, had to do with a European directive on working time and on the protection of maternity in general. Therefore, the case first went to a Greek court, the Protodiki of Thessaloniki, and the European law question was argued before the court, and so the judge said, there's a European law issue, I'm not sure how to resolve it. So I'm going to send the case to the Court of Justice of the European Union by asking questions. The question was simple. In case of twins or triplets, do we double the time? The Court of Justice said yes. That's how the European law has to be interpreted. So the national judge, the Greek judge from the Protodiki of Thessaloniki, took that interpretation, applied it to the facts of the case, and solved the case. So the lady is very happy. Every court, be that the lowest or the highest, can send questions to the Court of Justice of the European Union, can send a reference to the Court of Justice of the European Union. It doesn't have to be a Supreme Court. Supreme Courts are obliged to settle the cases if there is a European Union law issue. Therefore, what I'm trying to come to is that the administration of justice in the European Union is not just a matter of the Court of Justice. It is a network of courts working together that actually contribute each court in its own role, to the administration of justice of the European Union. We are all lawyers. Imagine the Court of Justice of the European Union is about 2,000 people, out of which 1,400 are lawyers. And we lawyers, we like to admire our own selves sometimes. So what we actually say is that the European Union and the European Court of Justice invented the internet before it actually happened. This is what we usually say, because we work in a network. It is not top down. In order for us to actually, for the Court of Justice to say something, to issue a ruling, we have to receive the question first, and the question comes from the national judge, which means that the national judge has the problem. I'll give you another example, which is very, very political right now, and the judgment should be out in the next couple of months. There was a Romanian citizen and a US citizen, both men, who got married in Belgium legally, because homosexual marriage is recognized and performed in Belgium. And then they decided to move to Romania, to live there. And they wanted their marriage to be recognized in Romania in order for them to be able to file joint tax returns, fiscal declarations, and get any benefits that spouses get. And Romania said no. So the case came to the Court of Justice of the European Union. Why? Because a Romanian judge asked. So we will have this very, very, very important ruling very soon. And it didn't happen because the court all of a sudden decided to rule on that matter, but it's because a national judge asked the question. I would like also to say a few words, because in my view this is also a fundamental element of democracy, and that's accountability. The Parliament, the European Parliament, controls the Commission. I don't know if you follow international news at all, but recently there's been an incident with the head of cabinet of the President of the European Commission. Jean-Claude Juncker is the President of the European Commission, and his head of cabinet is Martin Selmayr. Martin Selmayr was appointed by the College of Commissioners as Secretary General of the Commission through a procedure that some think was a bit dodgy. He was appointed to the most important, most powerful job in the Commission, basically without any other candidate. So what happened? Well, the Parliament didn't let that go. And now they want to establish a parliamentary committee and control whether this nomination was done according to the rules. And there are going to be public hearings about it. It's called Selmayr already. So the parliament controls. Commission controls the member states. The member states are obliged to comply with EU law. If they don't, the commission is always there to control and to even take them to court. This has happened many times for our country, but not only. Every single member state has been before the Court of Justice with what we call an infringement procedure, and the member states several times had to pay very, very hefty fines because they did not comply with EU rules. Let me give you an example. It was back in 2004, 2005. The European legislation provides that the fishing nets have to have a certain width in order to catch the bigger fish and let the younger fish live a little bit longer, and that way we sustain the stocks. I'm being very simplistic here. France did not comply and let its fishermen fish cod with smaller nets, with narrower nets, because the merluchon, which is the small cod, is a delicacy, especially in Normandy and in Britain. The case came to the court. The court said that France has to comply. France did not comply. The Commission waited a bit to give them time. They still didn't comply. So then the Commission came back to the court and it asked for 15 million euros fine for the past, non-compliance, and 300,000 euros per day of non-compliance for the future. And guess what? France complied. Same thing happened to Greece a couple of times, etc. So when it comes to the finances of the European Union, there is a court of auditors that audits the institutions to make sure that every single cent, which is the taxpayers' money, is spent the way it should be. Also there is a committee of budgetary control of the European Parliament that controls. And it broadens its control all the time. I had some problems with it myself. They wanted to give discharge for the budget of the court, like say that all the money back in 2015 was correctly spent, there were no irregularities. And we had questions like, you have a communications policy, why does your Twitter account only has 45,000 followers? That's not a lot. So we had to explain why that following in Twitter is not really pertinent, but it's the engagement rate. And so the European Parliament, in controlling the Court of Justice, goes as far as that. Imagine with the Commission. So there is accountability. Each institution, Parliament, Commission, Council, the Court, every institution has an internal audit, an independent internal audit service that audits procedures and tries to improve them all the time. And there is also an agency, an independent agency, that investigates fraud in the European Union institutions. It's called OLAF, Organisation pour la lutte antifraude. It's the French acronym, and they control whether the taxpayers' money is being correctly handled. Last but not least, transparency. I don't know if you know it, but you all have the right to request any document from the European institution. The right to access to documents. Sometimes that may be refused because it is a confidential document, or because it is covered by the privilege of the legal service giving confidential counsel to the College of Commissioners, for example, or there may be exceptions. But the general rule, which is wider and wider through the interpretation of the court, is that citizens have the right to access the documents of the European institutions. Also, each European institution has a communications department. And the communications department is there, and this is what I do for a living, is there to explain exactly what the institution is and what it does to the citizens. to briefly explain to you what my job is at the court. We make sure that we explain to the press what the court actually decided. We draft press releases on cases in simpler language, not legal language, so that the journalists can understand. We have mailing lists of journalists or even ordinary citizens who want to receive regularly news about the court, and we send on a weekly basis a newsletter about what happened the previous week and what is to be expected in the coming weeks about the court. We organize an open day. One day the court opens its doors, and we have in 4 hours about 4,000 to 5,000 people come to see how justice is done in the European Union, to see the hearing rooms, to meet the people who actually work at the court and see what they do. And we also have a Q&A with the president of the court. The president of the court meeting the citizens and explaining what the court is and what it does. We have an internet site. We're trying to make it as modern as possible in order to, as a vehicle of communication. We have a Twitter account, like I mentioned before. We manage, that was a personal fight because the Court of Justice is a rather conservative institution. We have a YouTube channel. Because these days, in order to better communicate, you have to enable the sharing, and sharing cannot happen if you just put like a text or maybe even a short video on a website. It has to be able to be shared. This is why we opted to open a YouTube channel, and we produced 4 multimedia animations, 1.5 minutes each. You can go to our YouTube channel and watch them. They're in every language. You can watch them in Hungarian if you speak it, but certainly in Greek. And we explain what the court does, how it functions, how the court affects the daily life of the citizens. And then, of course, it is the communications department that handles the transparency policy, because I mentioned before access to documents. Well, if you want to access the document of the court, you will send the request to us. Last observation about transparency and about the proximity of the European Union to the citizens is the ombudsman, or ombudsperson, as I should add, because now it's Miss Emily O'Reilly who's a woman. The ombudsman is in Greek called Evropeos Diamesolavitis, and it is a person, an institution, a service that receives complaints from the European citizens about maladministration or bad administration of the European Union, and issues recommendations to the institutions about how to make administration better. So, I gave you an overview. Now it's up to you tomorrow to decide whether everything that I said substantiates whether that the European Union is democratic. What I would like to say in conclusion is that Rome wasn't built in a day. So the European Union wasn't built in a day. It started humbly in the 50s with unifying and regulating the production of coal and steel. Then it moved into a market, economic community, so went on to economics, and then integration went further and further in many, many areas in order to become what it is today. Was there a democratic deficit at some point in the European Union? Absolutely. Is there a democratic deficit today? I humbly submit that no. Is the EU perfect? Well, no. Nobody's perfect. Can it be improved? Absolutely. And this is what I believe you should focus on tomorrow. How the European Union can be improved. Do we need more or less Europe in the future? I think this is a false question. What we need is more citizen involvement. And through that involvement, we will figure it out, whether we need more or less Europe. Therefore, in conclusion, I believe that Europe has to do some serious work in order to come closer to the citizens. And maybe what I said here today is maybe a little drop in the ocean in that direction. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Maybe I can just moderate here the Q&A session. So please, who would like to start if you have any questions? Yes, Karina.
Hello, my name is Karina. I'm a student of International Relations at IST. I'm very happy to be here because I learned all these things that I'm learning these years from my professors, but it was from a different scope because you are there, you're the main source now. And I would like to ask you two questions. The first one, how can young students intern there and find the, how can I say, a connection? Very important, because I don't know anyone in the European Union. How can I go there and intern or work in the future?
Let me stop you there.
Karen, could you stand up and face us so that everyone...
Or maybe use the microphone for that? Okay.
So, may I repeat the question? Okay. So, how can young students intern in the European Union without any connections or people who might know in the European Union? And the second question is, how can a citizen become more involved?
Okay. The first question is easy, although I have an issue a little bit with the premise of your question, because you started already on the wrong foot in talking about connections. It's not about connections. In order to intern in the European Union, the rules are very simple. They are on the website of every institution. First of all, you have to have a degree. Interns cannot be students. They have to have a degree, a bachelor's degree. That's the rule. There is a very rather transparent system called the Blue Book system. It's if you go to the Commission's website, you want to intern for the Commission. It is you apply. And there are about 400, I think, interns that are selected for a 6 month period. So we have two such selection processes per year. The same thing happens at the Court of Justice, but at the Court of Justice we have two types of internships. Again, a law degree is required, or a political science degree, so you would qualify. There are two types of internships. One is in the chambers of the judges. And there, the judges have the first and last word about whom they hire as interns, because there's a lot of confidential information in chambers of judges, and it is not possible for administration to actually select interns for them. But there's also the internships at the services of the court, the administrative service of the court, that's the research and documentation department, the library, my department, the communications department, translation department. And there is a formal selection procedure, just like it happens at the Commission. There is one difference between the two internships. The ones in the services, therefore the ones in my department, are paid. So you get 1,100 euros per month, which is not enough to live in Luxembourg, but if you are very frugal, you can make it happen. The internships at the judges' chambers are unpaid. Now, the second question was how citizens can get more involved. In order for citizens to get more involved, first of all, they have to be better informed. If you have, tell me something that really interests you. Tell me some issue that really impassions you.
Human rights.
Human rights. Well, human rights.
Trafficking.
Refugee crisis, etc. Yes. Well, there are associations that actually work towards that objective, that goal, and you should be part of those associations. And these associations actually lobby the European Union. That's a good lobby. It's not the sinister lobby, it's the good lobby. So, also, another way you can get involved is if you feel that Greece, the Greek government, is violating EU law, you can actually file a complaint with the Commission. There's no guarantee that the Commission will take it up.
But it's paid, right? You have to pay.
No.
Nothing?
No. Nothing. To file a complaint, nothing. To bring a case to the Court of Justice, nothing. It's all free. Which brings me to another point. A common myth is that the European Union civil service costs a lot. The budget of the European Union is 145 billion euros a year. I please ask the high school students not to answer this question. I would like for the college students to answer that. How much do you think represents the budget of the EU institutions for their functioning? To pay my salary, for example, or for the buildings, or for the electricity. Take a guess.
I know, and I'm
But if you know, you
we talked about it on Thursday, so that I would expect them to remember. We had a class on the EU budget.
Anyway, nobody. Yeah.
Is it about 1%?
No, it's 6%. Let's not exaggerate. It's 6%, which means that for these golden boy bureaucrats, only 6% of the budget goes to them, and to actually be able to function as a civil service. And the other 94%, well, where does it go? Back to the member states, in one way or another. 40% is the common agricultural policy. These are money that doesn't go to the DG, Director General of Agriculture of the Commission, to manage. No, it goes to the farmers. As far as justice in the European Union, well, out of that 6%, 5% of the 6% is the budget of the Court of Justice of the European Union. 0.3% of the EU budget. That's for justice. So, for what we do, that's not expensive.
Other questions?
You explained this very well.
You want to, so everyone back there can hear.
Okay, you explained us quite methodically how the European Union is structured and how it functions, and you expressed your opinion that there is not a democratical deficit on the European Union, but don't you believe that no one would actually question how democratically this institution is structured? On the contrary, one would question if it's being democratic all the way when it comes to decision making and action on the process.
In what sense? I'm trying to understand what your criticism is.
I'm just being confused. I don't think today in this convention we would discuss if it is being structured non-democratically, but if its decisions or its actions towards a crisis today in many kinds of sectors, it is being followed with democratic principles that it should have followed.
Now, I think that you're probably referring to the Greek crisis.
Just an example.
Yeah, well, because this is different. I was mainly referring to the European Union. There, as I tried to illustrate, all the decisions are taken by bodies which are democratically elected or that have indisputable, in my view, democratic legitimacy. Now, the crisis is different because I know that politicians like to blame everything on the European Union. Actually, this is one of the reasons for the success of the European Union, because national politicians had the opportunity to pass on the political cost to the European Union, saying, oh, we have to do it because the European Union says so. Therefore, they agreed and they promoted the European Union in order to be able to because it served them right. But the other side of the coin is that now the European Union is seen by many as the villain. So, with regard to the management of the crisis, not only in Greece, but also in Portugal and in Ireland, etc., the European Union acted simply as a facilitator for independent and sovereign governments to loan money to others. The European Union didn't loan any money, didn't impose any conditions. Well, that was purely member states. Now, can we envisage in the future that the European Union has a mechanism even more enhanced than the European Stability Mechanism in order to face such crises? Yes. It's one of its imperfections. I would agree with you on that. But that doesn't mean it's not democratic.
Sure, of course.
Don't forget that every single measure of austerity was voted by a parliament.
Thank you.
More questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. Your speech was really insightful. I learned a couple of things that I did not know before. So, in the beginning you stated that the EU is based, and correct me if I'm wrong, is based on equality and diversity, which what I concept by that is that we treat the people of the European Union as equals, but at the same time we respect the different values and ideas of the nation states, because it's not a super state, right?
Yeah.
We have to respect the values and traditions of that state. And you mentioned the linguistic aspect of it, that you talk in different languages, which is really, really good. So,
and I can, excuse me to interrupt you there, I can go even further to tell you that the Court of Justice of the European Union works in 24 languages.
yeah.
Irish people have the possibility to bring a case to us in Gaelic. We are ready for it. It will not happen because they are kind. But we are ready even for that. So please.
Okay. So I think we can all agree that some European states are more liberal and some are more conservative, which I would mention now the Hungary, for example, and the way they are tackling the refugee crisis, and the example that you gave with the Romanian government not accepting homosexuality. And since the
not accepting,
correct me,
not recognizing homosexual marriage.
recognizing homosexuality as an official way of marriage. Okay. So someone would argue that the majority of that country believes that it should stay like that, and is it democratic if Europe intervenes and says that no, you have to abide by our rules, so you have to recognize that? Is that democratic? Because in a domestic level, the people believe differently, and the European Union is based on diversity, which means that we have to respect the values of every nation state. And I believe this dualism will be a huge problem in the future of the European Union. Thank you.
That's a very good question. Back to basics. Majority rule, minority rights. Here you're in the sphere of fundamental rights. The right not to be discriminated against because of your sexual orientation or because of your race. This is enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which was approved by the Hungarian parliament. So it's the law in Hungary. Therefore, since it is the law in Hungary, the law has to be upheld, because the European Union is an association of states based on the rule of law. It's a union of states based on the rule of law. So it's not an issue of majority. I mean, you know, you can have like the majority of Greeks thinking that people of Albanian origin should be paid less. That doesn't mean that it will happen, because it's against the Greek constitution. Therefore, it is always remember, majority rules, but minority rights. Human rights are there to protect minorities against the majority. But I agree with you that it's a very important, it's a very challenging problem to tackle in the next few years.
Yes.
So I would also like to start off just by thanking you for your speech. Again, it's very well articulated, and I found it really interesting. So, as you may have guessed from my earlier recitation of the American Pledge of Allegiance, I am an American.
I can hear that.
And I don't want to make this, I don't want to make this about America. I feel like Americans already have the reputation of doing that a lot. But while I'm here, I can't help but wonder, and this is a rather open-ended question, but why is this important to, say, Americans and on a broader scale, the globe as a whole? It's because I obviously think it's important. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that. But in general, what are the broader implications of this outside of Europe? Again, I'm not sure if this is the proper venue for that, but
sorry, I didn't know the implications of what?
problems the EU is facing today. We talked a lot about the supposed democratic deficit, and that's essentially everything you're talking about here. Again, this isn't really for me, but it might. I'm curious to hear your opinion.
I'm not sure I understood your question. You're asking me what is my opinion, what are the implications of the perception of the democratic deficit in Europe, or?
What are in your opinion, the effects of the supposed democratic issues or crises of the European Union outside the European continent?
Well, consequences outside of the European continent. These kind of crises make Europe weaker. So at the end, it's to the detriment of all its member states. And I think that because regrettably, but most likely, soon we will have the first time that the member state of the European Union is exiting the European Union. And there the reality starts to unravel. There was the myth of the Brexit campaign and the 300 million pounds that would go to the national health system in the UK if they go out of the European Union. Now we're slowly progressing towards the reality, which means that up until now, I had the European Agency for in order that approves all the pharmaceutical products that are to be commercialized in the European Union. Now I have to make that agency by myself. Well, that's money. Food Safety Agency, that's money. Chemicals Agency, that's money. All that the UK has to do now. I think that this whole process will show why Europe has to stay strong and why these problems that weaken the European Union have to be resolved within the European Union structures in order for Europe to actually survive and compete against China, which is, I go back to the territorial, it's more than double the size of the European Union, Canada, the US, India. Am I answering your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
William, I have a question here.
Yeah?
Isn't it can't you make the argument that there's more democracy at the level of the European Union than in certain member states? And I take the issue of freedom of information. This is something you brought up. It's something important in your line of work. Isn't it the case that there are laggards, member states, that don't apply legislation that requires them to make information public? The information is available at the level of the European Union, but not so at the level of the member state. For example, one particular case.
That is true, but I would also repeat what I said before, that in many countries in the European Union, you don't have such a clear separation between the executive and the legislative power, so the one doesn't control the other. And that is a problem of democracy, and you find it in member states, but you don't find it in the European Union. Because the Commission is actually controlled by Parliament. The Greek Parliament doesn't control the ministers as intensely as it should. And it's the same thing, not only in Greece. Greece is closer to us, that's why I'm using it as an example. It is the same in other countries as well.
So the implication is when we do our democratic convention, maybe the next one we'll talk about how to improve democracy in Greece.
In the member
Probably.
states. In the member states.
And lastly, because I'm going back to your question, Corina, was it? Karina, yes. It's about citizens' involvement. Another thing I would like to tell you is an innovation brought about by the Treaty of Lisbon, which is the Citizens' Initiative. If enough citizens in all member states gather enough signatures, then they can force the Commission to examine an issue. They cannot force the Commission to propose legislation. The Commission always has discretion to propose it or not. But they can actually bring the Commission before its responsibilities and make the Commission examine the issue. So that's citizens' involvement as well.
How many signatures approximately?
You're catching me a little bit off guard.
Okay, we have a certain number.
But you can Google it. You'll have the answer in like a few seconds. This is what I'm going to do actually. If you want me to give you the answer.
It's actually 1 million signatures of 1/4 member nations, I think.
That's a lot.
Something like that.
That's a lot. Yeah. There is someone else here before? Yeah, and then next. Yes?
I wanted to know your personal opinion on how you see the EU's role in terms of the international relations, and especially in relations with US. Do you see it as a superpower in the future, or as a soft power, or something else maybe?
I see the European Union as a power that can actually promote and advocate its core values. This is my if you want, my ambition also for the European Union. The superpower always refers to military power, and this is not what the European Union is.
That's what I was asking.
European Union, I see common defense, I see common army for defense purposes, but I don't see Europe as a superpower. In the sense, the traditional sense, just like the Soviet Union and the United States of it.
So more like intermediary and like soft power?
That's a more appropriate role for the European Union, in my humble opinion.
I'm asking this because there is this debate going on that if the EU is going to exist in not in the near future, but in the future. Not many are debating the existence of US as a superpower, but they are discussing about EU being this strong in the future.
Well, I mean, strong. The European Union, if it stays united, it is always going to be a very big economic power. That is for sure. And believe me, just because I like also to bring examples from current affairs. If the European Union didn't exist as a unique trading bloc, imagine what the response would have been in Donald Trump's menace to put tariffs on steel. If you had every country of the European Union saying something different. United, we're stronger.
Okay. Okay, yeah. We have also one question here, but maybe after after those. Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
So you brought up this case with French fisheries, and I spot the contrast between the ICJ fining France for fisheries, for the nets, and then on the other side I see all this that is going on with the refugee crisis, with certain countries raising the fences on the borders, their xenophobic attitude and everything connected to it. And then I was wondering, perhaps I'm not well informed, so correct me. Are they getting fined, or does ICJ implement accordingly the fines?
Yeah, ICJ is the International Court of Justice. ECJ. Yes. Cases regarding the refugee crisis have arrived at the Court of Justice of the European Union, and the Court of Justice has interpreted the Dublin Treaty, which is actually the legislative framework right now. And of course, infringement procedures take time. They don't happen from one day to the next. So I'm sure that the Commission will bring a case against Hungary or against Slovakia if it feels that they are grossly violating EU laws. So far, it has been actually Hungary and Slovakia that brought actions against the European Union, claiming that the whole refugee scheme with the distribution of specific number of refugees in the different countries. Yeah, and of course their actions were rejected. So, but that's what the court decided.
Yeah, but are there any counter actions from the ECJ? That's what I was.
The ECJ doesn't have the initiative. It's the political institutions that have the initiative. So it's the Commission that has to do it. The Commission has to bring a case to the court. This is how it works.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions here, and I think then we need to close. We have the room for a certain time anyway, right?
I think for another 10 minutes.
Yeah, but let's see.
I'll make this a quick one. In regards to what Karina was saying before about internship opportunities with the European Union, what about for somebody who's not necessarily a European citizen, as an American? Is there still the similar internship opportunities or even potential career opportunities for somebody who doesn't necessarily plan in the future on being an EU citizen, but certainly isn't right now?
In the last internship cycle, in my department, I had a Swiss intern. So yes, it is exceptional. Mainly, it's for European Union citizens, but there is a clause that says that if properly justified, we can actually have interns from other member states, including the US. Especially, the Court of Justice has a program with the American Embassy in Luxembourg, which is called the Dean Acheson program. And in the context of that program, we have law graduates from American universities that can come for an unpaid internship in chambers of judges.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, I hear two questions. Let's close with this.
With regards to the current affairs that you talked about earlier, let us ask you about Turkey and Greece. So we have so many violations this period of Turkey passing through air and from the sea to our land, to our country. I would like to ask you if the European Union can do something about it and put sanctions in Turkey.
In theory, they can, but we have to speak in terms of realpolitik. I'm not sure that they will.
And connected to that,
in theory, for example, the European Union has imposed sanctions on Russia.
What about our soldiers that have been kept now in the jails, Turkish jails? Do you think they're going to be free?
I think the official view of the European Union would be that it's a bilateral issue.
Maria, last question, okay?
Hi. Your speech was great. Having the experience of being in the European Parliament and working there for over 5 months, I had the chance to actually listen to the President of the Commission giving his speech later this September, in the plenary of the European Parliament. And since we are talking about how democratic the EU is right now, I would like to make a more political rather than legal question. The President of the Commission actually addressed his State of the Union on, first of all, combining the two presidencies of the Commission and the Council together, and after all, proposing the Spitzenkandidaten model for a chief leader, meaning that the leader of the Commission and the Council, if this happens, has to go through an electoral campaign, actually meet people. He actually told that, he stated, for example, that the new leader should have the communication like meeting people from Helsinki to Athens and vice versa. Do you think that this proposal and this initiative that the President of the Commission stated previously would actually make the citizens face the European Union differently than they face it now? Do you think that this initiative will make the European Union, will actually make it lean towards the citizens more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I strongly believe it. I doubt it whether the Spitzenkandidaten system will actually be expanded to the President of the Council. I don't think so that the member states will want that and that they will allow it. That's my assessment. I wish it would happen, but I'm not sure that it will. But I truly believe that going forward with the Spitzenkandidaten system for the President of the Commission is the way to go forward and enhancing that. And with even more debates between the Spitzenkandidaten in different areas of the European Union.
Thank you very much.
Can we take one last question, please, if there is a last question? Okay.
Okay, so we see that in the recent years, because I'm really intrigued by this matter in the European Union, we are seeing many nationalistic movements as Brexit or the Catalonia that just happened now, the referendum, and all these right-wing parties.
Let me just open a parenthesis. Catalonia was not a movement about exiting the European Union. They actually claim that they're more European
Yes,
than the Spanish government. Anyway.
I meant the movement of becoming independent in general in Europe. And we are seeing that many right-wing parties are becoming more and more popular in Europe. Here in Greece, Chrysialki, and in Hungary, there is a right-wing party right now that got elected. And I would like to ask you, since you are a part of the European Union, you are a direct part of it, you are working, how do you perceive this thing? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? The working environment in there?
Well, I mean, all these populist parties and movements gaining strength is, in my view, not a very positive thing. Of course, it's a very worrisome thing. But I think that in order to counter that, we have to do better and more sessions just like this one, where we actually explain what the European Union is. Because all these populist parties have one thing in common. They portray the European Union as the big villain, which it isn't. We have to go back to the citizen and explain to them that it's because of the European Union and especially the Court of Justice that they actually have the right to be compensated if their flight has been delayed for 4 hours or more. Just to give you one example. Or explain what was the role of the European Union to ensuring equal pay for men and women. Or the abolition of discriminations in various fields of everyday life. Or the fact that, you know, when a doctor or a fireman is on call, that is working time. That is working time. So you cannot actually say that the time where you're obliged to sleep in the hospital waiting for somebody to come, that's not working time, so it doesn't count as overtime. Little things like that. We do not explain it enough. And this is what the European Union has to do more. It has to communicate more with the citizens in order to explain the benefits of being in Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the working time of the people working here is over, so we have to respect that.
Let me just say, on behalf of the Dukakis Center, thank you very much, William, for speaking here. And I think Dr. Kyriakidou has some instructions she'd like to share about how we proceed tomorrow.
Yeah, I just want to mention to all the members of the working groups, both high school and university students, we will all be here at 10, starting to deliberate and starting our debates. Then we have a coffee break, then we have a lunch break, and between 2 and 3. And then after 3, we're going to have the plenary, where you're going to have your correspondent that is going to present your contribution to the charter. So let's be all here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and start working again. Thank you very much.